It started with a knock on my cabin door, loud, impatient, and way too early for a Saturday. I opened it to find two HOA board members standing there, clipboards in hand and fake smiles glued to their faces. They didn't even say hello before one of them started rattling off violations. According to them, my cabin was infringing on protected lake access, and they'd already started the demolition process. I just stood there in my flannel shirt and boots, stunned that they were serious. This was my family's land, passed down 3 generations, and that cabin had stood there longer than the HOA even existed. They claimed they had full jurisdiction and told me I had 30 days to tear it down or they'd do it for me. I could feel the heat rise in my chest, but I stayed calm. They had no idea who they were talking to. See, while they were busy flexing HOA rules, they didn't realize that the land their entire boardwalk and parking lot sat on? It was mine. Leased under my LLC for decades, and I'd never once pulled rank, until now. The look on their faces when I hinted at the truth was priceless. But I didn't give it all away, not yet. I had a better plan, one that would flip the situation. Completely. And they were about to learn the hard way that picking a fight over lake rights with the actual landlord wasn't just foolish, it was a massive mistake. As they marched off, smug and sure they'd won, I closed the cabin door and pulled out the old property file I kept in a locked drawer. The lease agreement was right where I left it, signed, notarized, and crystal clear. My grandfather had worked out that deal years ago, granting the HOA limited access to the land surrounding the lake. What they didn't realize was that any breach of that agreement gave me legal grounds to revoke their use entirely. And threatening to demolish my cabin? That definitely counted. Over the years, I'd stayed out of their business, letting them run their meetings and throw their little HOA events like they owned the place. Most of the homeowners didn't even know the land was leased. The board had always kept that detail conveniently vague in their newsletters. But now, backed into a corner, they were trying to flex power they never really had. I figured it was time to pay a quiet visit to the county records office, just to make sure nothing sneaky had been filed without my knowledge. As I pulled into town later that day, I couldn't shake the feeling something more was going on. Their sudden push to demolish the cabin didn't feel random, it felt calculated. And when I found out what had recently been approved on the HOA's upcoming agenda, it all started to make sense. They weren't just trying to reclaim lake access, they were planning to sell it off, and my cabin was in the way. The more I looked into it, the clearer their scheme became. The HOA board had quietly submitted a proposal to a commercial developer, offering up unclaimed land surrounding the lake for a luxury dock and private boathouse plan. Of course, they didn't mention that the so-called unclaimed land included my cabin, or that I technically held the lease on all of it. They must have assumed I wouldn't notice, or maybe they were counting on me not fighting back. Either way, they were playing a dangerous game. I started getting calls from a few concerned residents who'd caught wind of the board's sudden push for demolition. One even admitted he overheard a board member bragging about getting rid of that old eyesore to clear the way for the new project. These weren't just HOA politics anymore. This was turning into a full-blown land dispute, and the stakes were climbing fast. Meanwhile, I began to notice unfamiliar vehicles parked near the lake more often, usually around dusk. It felt like someone was watching, waiting for me to leave so they could act without resistance. I couldn't shake the feeling that they had something up their sleeve, maybe forged documents, or plans to bring in county inspectors with some cooked-up violations. The tension in the neighborhood was growing. Whispers were spreading, neighbors were picking sides, and what started as a cabin preservation issue had now become a fight over lake rights, land control, and who really held the power. And the board wasn't backing down. Things escalated faster than I expected. One morning, I drove out to the cabin to check on things and found a bright orange notice nailed to the front door. an emergency demolition warning issued by the HOA's private enforcement contractor. No county seal, no legal backing. Just a logo and a date that was only 3 days away. It was clear they were bluffing hard, hoping I'd panic and vacate before anyone questioned the legality of it. I snapped photos and called my attorney immediately. He confirmed what I suspected. The HOA had no jurisdiction to demolish structures on private land, and especially not with fake paperwork. But the bigger issue was the timeline. They were acting quickly, probably banking on intimidation to do the job before the truth caught up. And if they did manage to destroy my cabin, undoing the damage wouldn't be easy. I needed to act fast. That same afternoon, I went to the next HOA meeting, uninvited. You could have heard a pin drop when I walked in. The board president, a smug guy named Don, tried to pretend everything was under review, but I could tell he was rattled. Behind him, a large display map showed the entire lake property, with big red lines cutting through land that was supposed to be mine. That map told me everything. They weren't just trying to remove a structure, they were trying to redraw the entire landscape. Everyone in the room waited to see what I'd say next. I just smiled and opened my folder. Inside that folder, I had something no one in that room expected. A set of documents proving that not only did I own the land my cabin sat on, but also a long-overlooked lease agreement from over a decade ago. It showed that the HOA's common area, yes, including their precious lake access, community docks, and even their little welcome center, was technically built on land still owned by my late grandfather. And that lease? It expired 3 months ago. The moment I laid the paperwork on the table, the atmosphere shifted. A few board members leaned in, eyes wide. Don, on the other hand, went stiff and started sweating. Then came the second twist I didn't even see coming. After the meeting, one of the residents pulled me aside in the parking lot. She looked nervous but determined. She handed me a flash drive and said, "You need to see what Don's been doing." That night, I opened it up and found email chains, internal memos, even draft documents. They'd been plotting to annex several parcels around the lake for months. The plan was to scare out small owners like me, demolish anything in the way, and then push through a rezoning deal to boost their property values and beautify the neighborhood. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was a full-blown land grab. The more I dug, the clearer it became. They were willing to push legal limits and cross moral lines. Now I had the proof. But the question was, what would I do with it? The next morning, I showed up unannounced to the HOA's emergency board meeting, this time with a real estate attorney and the county zoning officer at my side. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just handed them copies of the expired lease and the emails from Don's scheme. The room went silent. A few board members looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Don tried to deny everything, but the zoning officer shut him down quickly. He confirmed the lease's expiration meant the HOA had been trespassing and operating on land they no longer had legal rights to. That included the docks, the boat storage lot, even part of the clubhouse. Then came the final twist. The county. Officer pulled out his own documents. Turns out, a quiet investigation had already been started after complaints from other lakefront owners. Don wasn't just planning a land grab. He'd forged a few signatures and filed false permits. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. As they escorted him out, red-faced and muttering threats, the rest of the room just watched. Stunned, with Don gone, the HOA board had no choice but to negotiate. They agreed to not only leave my cabin alone, but to pay back lease fees for the use of my family's land. And just as things seemed to wrap up, the new board president leaned over and said, "We'd actually like to offer you a spot on the board, if you're interested." I smiled, but inside, I already knew my answer. I thanked the new president for the offer, but politely declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. What mattered most to me was that my cabin, my family's legacy, was safe. The lake remained quiet, the water just as peaceful as I remembered growing up. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood, and to my surprise, some residents came by to apologize. A few even brought over pie or homemade jam. Saying they had no idea what Don had been up to, I started spending more weekends at the cabin, fixing it up little by little. It felt good to reclaim it, not just physically, but emotionally too. There was something grounding about chopping wood, fishing at sunrise, and watching the wind move through the trees. Every now and then, I'd spot a board member walking near the shoreline, nodding respectfully, no longer with that same smug energy they once carried. The shift in tone was clear as for Don. Last I heard, he was dealing with legal trouble and no longer welcome anywhere near HOA leadership. His downfall served as a quiet lesson for those who once supported his schemes without question. In the end, I didn't just protect a piece of land. I stood up for fairness, for history, and for the quiet right to be left alone. So the next time someone underestimates a cabin owner, they might want to double-check who holds the deed. Because sometimes the one being